Hello everyone, welcome to this current episode, what's going on right now of Truth Noir. We've gone through 10 episodes so far. We're in our 11th episode. I'm pretty stoked about it, man.
That's in school, 10 weeks would be an elective course.
Yeah,
or for 10 weeks, so that's a substantial.
Yeah, you would have completed a certificate program by now. If this were like a show where people were getting paid to do shit, like we would be done with our first season by now. Mm-hmm. We'd be able to go on vacation and visit Machu Picchu and shit.
That's just research for future episodes.
Yeah, absolutely. But as it is, we're just stoked to still be here, and I'm stoked to be here once again with Adam Papigan, who has actually been the host for the majority of our episodes so far. So it's always good to have him. Always good to be talking to you, Adam. How you doing?
I'm doing great.
Awesome, man. You recently, this is a thing we worked on together a little bit, but you recently did some content for a music festival that occurred recently. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, I did. It was a dual programming. It was called Berserk TV, which was essentially just a video installation. It was the visuals for this music festival. But in between the bands, we had a show, a new show that aired only at the music festival called Backstage Live, trying to give the real taste of what it's like backstage. Do you think that we accomplished that? I mean, you were there.
I would say so. It was definitely a fun thing.
There.
I would say it was definitely a fun thing to be a part of. And I was, while you guys were in the back making it happen, I was out front kind of helping with the front end stuff a little bit. And it definitely got some applause. And, I think things like that go on, music festivals and other live events, between main events, like between, in this case it was bands that were playing, you always have that transition time, and it usually takes a while and it's boring, and I think the content that you guys did really helped kind of bridge that gap. And yeah, absolutely, man. No, it was an honor to be a part of, and
I feel like we were missing, we didn't really capture some of the pretension that was there.
There's a lot of that too.
We should have done a behind the scenes, that's what I should have used the VHS camera for, I think. Is doing kind of this is how lame people really are. But then, I'm not trying to call anybody lame, call anybody out. No, I'm not if I'm not using names. But there were some people trying very hard there to be cool, who if you talk to them for 5 seconds, you would know they're not cool. These are the same people who would be cops, given
right. Yeah, hey guys, what are you doing?
A slightly different hand.
Yeah. Well, you have to deal with that in kind of any aspect of life, and it always sucks. But I think the effort was valiant, and I'm anxious to see some of the content videos, and so yeah, man, Berserk TV. Backstage Live with Adam Papigan, coming soon to a venue near you. Let's make it happen. Mm-hmm. Our show topic today was kind of a continuation from last week's episode. We were talking about aliens and kind of giving a very brief overview of some of the kind of legitimate research that has been done with regard to possible extraterrestrial creation of our society as we know it. There's certainly a lot of bullshit out there. The kind of Queen of England is a reptile stuff. Yeah. I'm not saying it's untrue. It's kind of way out for most people to accept. And so before we kind of even broach that kind of way out sort of stuff, I wanted to kind of give an introduction, introducing the kind of genuine research that is going on, the sort of actual anomalous kind of things that, have not been satisfactorily explained, that have actually, occurred, and, the carbon dating, when you date this stuff, it goes back 20,000 years, but it's super advanced. And so I wanted to look at that today and kind of go a little bit further in depth with it. But before we get to that, the last episode, I put up this picture, and we'll go ahead and make it full screen. That, oh no, wait, this is full screen. There we go. Now, what I said was not specifically untrue. I did say that this specific carving came from a cathedral in Spain that was 500 years old, and that is true. But as it turns out, this carving was, because obviously you see this carving that looks like an astronaut, maybe from the Apollo space program, on a building that is 500-600 years old. Unfortunately, that's not the case. This was not part of the original construction. And, it's never fun to, make a retraction, but it's one of those things where I feel like if we're going to, play at being journalists, you have to be able to do that every once in a while and admit when you made a little bit of a mistake. And this is one of those times where our little spaceman here is from restoration work that was done on this cathedral in the, I believe it was the early 80s. And it was done not as a spoof or anything like that. It was done as a tribute to some of the great achievements of humanity that had happened since the cathedral's construction. Absolutely. And so, yeah, so not quite original to the original construction. It doesn't quite serve as the evidence that I thought it did for the, ancient alien theory that I'm trying to support, but I did in the meantime find some other cool stuff for us. So
that's good. I applaud you too, also for taking responsibility, taking the lumps for.
Well, yeah, everyone makes a mistake every once in a while, and if I'm going to credit myself as being better than Fox News, we need to be able to do that every once in a while. So, my apologies, but I did make up for it by finding some other cool shit. And so here it is. There are works of art that are maybe not far older, but older than this cathedral that have given me a little bit of reason to think that some of this stuff might be valid. And artists have always been the sort of allegorical purveyors of the truth. Maybe if they're not able to say it outright, they represent these things in pictures. And so what we have here is a painting of the Annunciation. And if you're familiar with the Bible, this is the point in time where the Blessed Mother
is told that she's going to be
Mother of God. That she's going to bear a son. And so she's pictured in the middle in detail. The entire picture is on the left. Now, in the stories, she was told, of course, by an archangel that is seen sort of hovering above her beatified head. You can see that she has a halo floating over her. There's a little dove, that represents the archangel. But if you look on the left, you see that there is a sort of ray of light, or a sort of beam of energy coming through this archangel pictured as a dove. And when you follow that beam up from these details on the far left and in the middle, if you look at where they lead to in the full picture on the left, you see that this kind of looks like a UFO. And there's plenty of other works of art that that actually sort of look the same. This is another one. This is work by Hieronymus Bosch, and this actually comes before the previous painting that we saw. This is the Crucifixion, and this is a very close-up detail, and we showed this in the last episode. when you look at the entire picture, what you see is what you would picture from the crucifixion, Jesus being crucified, a group of people around him, but in the background, up in the sky, what you see are a couple of little dudes flying around in these kind of little Sputnik-looking craft, you know, and it just kind of looks odd to me. Like, what else can that mean? You know, little guy flying around in a thing in the sky. And these types of things recur throughout religious artwork in early times, medieval, Gothic, you know, and even earlier than that throughout the world. And, you know, it just kind of makes you think, like, why would these artists do that? Like, yes, they were very imaginative people, but you wouldn't probably paint that, you know, if you had never seen something like that before. So, I don't know, man.
Is it always in relation to religion?
It oftentimes is, yeah, and this recurs in artwork across thousands of years, as it turns out. The Egyptians also, and I'll have to, you know, as always on this show, the pictures get mashed up, so I'll have to search through it for a little bit. But, you know, in Egyptian hieroglyphs, you have these carvings in the walls of these things that look like helicopters or flying saucers, not unlike our you know, Hieronymus Bosch man here in the little Sputnik spaceship. In the early dwellings of indigenous peoples, you often see, you know, in their dwellings where they have pictures drawn of their kind of like creation story, there's always kind of spaceship looking things like this. And it's, you know, I just kind of feel like we're coming to a point in time where this is no longer laughable. Like, it kind of has to be taken seriously. And so, I don't know. I mean, what do you think about it, man?
About UFOs and yeah, I think it's all pointing to the same thing. The questions we have now have always existed throughout humanity. I just can't tell if we're any closer to answering them, or maybe these questions have always been answerable. You know, Plato wrote that whole book about what he thought. Maybe it is possible. You know, we don't need to look into the cosmos, we just need to look within.
Well, yeah, you know, he, and I feel like philosophers have always been saying these things. You know, when you look at this story, and this is the picture I was looking for. These are Egyptian hieroglyphs, man. These are things that were carved in the walls of the pyramids, and if you look, you know, at the bottom you have this detail of a little bit larger, you know, piece up top. But if you look on the top left, you see a thing that looks quite a bit like a helicopter. If you look on the right towards the middle, that looks quite a bit like a flying saucer. You know, and it's like, well, what else could it be?
A ballpoint pen?
Well, yeah, you know, yeah, you could say, well, you know, it could be these certain other things, but these, you know, ballpoint pen, also not appropriate to the time period.
Exactly.
Like,
that's what I'm saying. It's all pointing at the same thing.
It's, yeah, it's that, like.
But the pen can be used to explore these ideas.
Absolutely.
Just like the picture can, just like the helicopter can.
Yeah, all of these, you know, sort of aerial devices or writing implements, as we've talked about, like, they can be used to obviously explore from on high, and they can also be used to, you know, write down the way things actually were. And these old stories, you know, have fallen into the sort of, and I think it's a disrespectful position of being like, oh, these were just these kind of made up things that people use to describe you know, the things that were going on around people, like where did the sun go at night? Well, you know, there's a snake that eats the sun. Well, you know, there's other stuff that they said too, and when you take these things a little bit more seriously, it goes a lot further to explain these sorts of chariots of the gods kind of stories. And there's other stuff too. There's, I don't know, are you familiar with the Baghdad battery?
No.
The first one of its kind was, as you might imagine, was found in Iraq. But what they first thought, and you know, and many of them are like just clay pots that had stuff in them, but some of them had this weird stuff in them. So you have your clay pot on the left, you see a zinc, rolled up zinc, right, coil in the middle, and on the right you have a copper rod. And so basically what that is the dry makings of a battery. All you need is an acidic liquid, and then when they analyzed the residue on the inside of these clay canisters, they found the residue of citrus juice. And you know, as we know,
It's acidic.
Yeah, it's acidic enough to create voltage, like when they made one of these from the materials, you know, that they saw them being made of. These little clay canisters produced a charge equivalent of about 6 volts, which is you know, equivalent of about 4 AA batteries. It's a strong enough voltage to electroplate metals in possibly a crude fashion.
What do you think with this clay pot, this battery technology, what do you think, Norm, they were trying to get at with it, or what do you think they were powering?
Well, you know, I think it could have been any number of things, you know, and I hate to answer questions with questions, but you know, with regard to that one, I would ask, what can you do with batteries today? Like, you can do all kinds of stuff, right? You can power a light bulb, you know, and this goes to speak quite a bit towards, you know, how some of this artwork was put into the pyramids. You know, these like intricate carvings deep in the pyramids, where they're like, well, how the hell did they see what they were doing, kind of thing. Well, it would be impossible. Like, there's been theories that they had mirrors strategically aligned where the sunlight would.
Oh, I've heard about that.
You know, a very valid theory, but then when they did that, they had these highly polished mirrors. They found that process, like doing it that way, only worked like 20 feet and maybe around 3 corners. So you could get a little bit of the way in, but when you have these massive structures like the pyramids, wouldn't have cut the mustard, as it were, you know. And so, so it's these things that we find that there is no other rational explanation for. You know, when you say, well, you know, these people, you know, didn't have tools, and oh, well, this, you know, this clay pot here, well, that's just kind of an anomaly, and we don't know what it was for. Well, we know what it could have been used for. We know how our batteries are constructed today. We know what we see on the walls of the pyramids. We know what we see in medieval artwork. And I don't know if you saw the last episode, but like I showed these broadsheets, which were basically medieval newspapers, but they were only 1 page. It was like the most important thing that happened that day they would print. You know, this was very early printing. And so in the city of Nuremberg in the mid-1500s, there's this broadsheet that shows this like way out shit happening in the sky. and and it's a lot of like colored balls and oddly shaped things, and it looks like they're shooting at each other. And then the broadsheet shows that one of them crashed and destroyed a building. And that stuff doesn't happen normally. you know. So all of these things that have gone without explanation for so long because people have, that have been in charge of telling you what's what have been like, oh, don't worry about it. Let's stop that and start asking questions and say, well, look, let's stop ignoring these things, So, so yeah, there's that kind of stuff. You had any way out paranormal experiences, man?
Recently or ever?
Ever.
Yeah, I've seen 2 UFOs. Now, I'm not saying that they were aliens, but I definitely experienced the phenomenon that I think people are talking about when they talk about UFOs.
Yeah, sure.
The first time I was in New Mexico, which, as you know, is a hotbed of UFO activity.
Absolutely.
Anywhere out in the desert like that. That could have to do with like the magnetic fields out there and the soil and the metals and there's waves and stuff out there. But we were in the van, we were driving into Albuquerque or someplace like that. It was just before sunset, and I was kind of halfway in and out of sleep. But right at this one moment, there was this flash, and it wasn't so much that I saw it, but I felt it. And not only did I feel it, but Sean, Sean, also felt it. And he's very sensitive, like he's very aware of what's going on. And more importantly, David Liebelhart confirmed that it was a UFO.
Oh my goodness.
And that guy knows more about UFOs than anybody I ever met.
Yeah.
He's autistic for UFOs. So.
Yeah, and when we say autistic, I don't mean to interrupt you, but when we say like autistic, I want to clarify that like I've worked with a lot of autistic children and also adults, and these are people that are very sensitive to their surroundings, and this is why they might come off sometimes as socially awkward or kind of off in their own little world at times. But what I've come to find is that they're hypersensitive.
The feeling part of their brain works just fine. Works better than the average person.
Probably top 1%
Absolutely.
Or something, and it can get overwhelming, and that's why they have difficulties in school settings as children. But yeah, these are people that are very sensitive to these things.
More perceptive to these, especially if they're not things that are black and white. They're things that are gray and that involve more abstract thinking and feeling.
For sure.
Can be much more perceptive.
Yeah.
So yeah, and then the second time I saw a UFO, I was going on just a West Coast tour with Joyce Manor, and it's just up and down. So I was like, oh, there's going to be a day off like around Mount Shasta. We should stay there so we can see UFOs. That's another UFO place. So
well, yeah, Mount Shasta is supposed to be
one of
the and it's also supposed to be one of the key chakra points.
Yes.
Of like if you consider the Earth as a, like we were talking about on There's a Place when I was on, this sort of Earth as a consciousness kind of thing. I've heard it said that Mount Shasta is one of those chakra points. Turns out that it's just up the road from us a little ways.
It's pretty far. It's past San Francisco.
Yeah, it's about 8 hours, but
in this grand scheme of things, the universe.
Just kind of up the road a ways.
But I wanted to go there. It wasn't going to work out. So I was like, oh, darn. So we're up in Ventura. They have the Air Force Base over there. Yeah. So the band that was opening for them was touring in an RV. So we go in the RV, and I was talking about how I wish we could see a UFO. I was a little disappointed. I step out, and right there in front of me is some kind of craft, some kind of airplane that's just going through the sky, and it's got like this like halo thing around it because of the way it was coming in or whatever. Now, most likely it was just a military aircraft they were testing or something like that. Almost surely, because there's the Air Force Base or whatever right by Ventura.
Sure, makes sense.
But somebody else who saw a UFO could have seen something similar to that and felt like they saw a UFO, and that could have put them down the rabbit hole of getting into this stuff and investigating it and looking about how all these weird things could be connected or why there are weird things. So I would count that as well as experience of the UFO phenomenon. So I had a
totally fair, man.
Physical experience with UFOs and one visual experience with UFOs.
Okay. Yeah, I was taking a 40-mile bike ride with my uncle and my cousin through Joshua Tree. And we had finished with that, and we were driving out of the area, and as we were on this like super desolate road, I saw this thing, you know, and it looked like a shooting star at first. And you know how you see a shooting star and you're like, oh man, that's awesome. But then it just kept getting bigger and bigger and like closer, you know. And as it turned out, this thing ended up crashing, you know, what couldn't have been more than like a mile away. Like it was super bright, and it like you could actually like sort of feel the vibration from it hitting the ground, you know. And I don't know, like maybe it was just a falling star, you know, like some kind of meteorite that fell out of the sky. Maybe it was, you know, part of a satellite that was launched in the 60s or something, or, you know, it could have been something else. But, you know, like these, yeah, you know, I think we can both agree these things do happen that go without explanation. And
that is significant.
Yeah.
That these things can even happen. We're even talking about them.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's worth investigating.
And while we cannot explain them, I think that there are people who know much better what's going on, and you know, but sometimes are not able, even if they want to, are not able to like fully disclose this kind of stuff. And you know, it sucks for us, but you know, it's that kind of thing that, like, you know, there's certain things that you keep from little kids, you know, because they're not ready to know it yet. Their understanding is not at the point where they would be able to accept it and still carry on a happy childhood, you know. In that kind of same way, I feel like the leaders of the world, whether they're shitheads or not, you know, maybe they're benevolent people that are working towards the service of the ones who, you know, put them in power and that they represent, or maybe they're fuckface assholes. But either way, I feel like there's certain information that would really get people amped up way out of control if they knew. That, you know, I think you know, a lot of it we're getting closer to, but a lot of it people would still have a very negative reaction to. Like if the government, you know, or if the Pope came out tomorrow and was like, yep, God was an alien, we were created by aliens, you'd have a lot of people like jumping off of buildings and causing a ruckus and all of this kind of thing. And this actually goes back to antiquity, where, you know, I call it the story of the flood. This is a universal story, the deluge. The Bible tells it as the world had become wicked. God chose one man to save, and that was Noah. And he said, Noah, I need you to build a boat. Yeah, the rest of the story is fairly well known. So that version of the story represents information that only one person was allowed to know. No one else was allowed to know. Everyone else was supposed to get washed out and died. There's an older Gesundheit. There is an older version of that story, and it turns out, you know, like I said, the deluge story is universal. There are versions of it that go back, you know, that are attributed as, you know, 10,000 years. So this is a thing in the very distant past, regardless of whether you agree on exactly what year it happened. The oldest version that I am familiar with is the one from Sumerian mythology. And this is where, and it differs a little bit from the biblical version, but in Sumerian mythology, the gods decided that humanity had just become too much. They were just going to wipe them all out, and we don't need them to serve us anymore. Like we're gonna we created them to build our cities and mine the gold, and fuck them now. The one god, Enki, who was kind of sympathetic to the human cause, he was this sort of like Prometheus kind of character. He was involved directly in the actual creation, the genetic manipulation of apes to create humanity. He didn't want that to happen. He wanted to save humans because he felt this kind of kinship, fathership with them. And so what he did, and it might kind of seem like an insignificant detail, but the gods decided that the humans weren't allowed to know that the deluge was going to happen. And so he did a very interesting thing that is poignant even till today. And what he did was and it wasn't Noah, he wasn't called Noah in the Sumerian story, he was called Atrahasis. And so Enki had one of his servants summon Atrahasis to the temple of Enki. And he had Enki stand on the other side of a door or a screen or something of the sort. And he wasn't allowed to tell Atrahasis directly what he was planning on, but he did say something, and I paraphrase, but he did say this. He said, "Oh, screen," he addressed the screen, not Atrahasis. He said, "Oh, screen, how shall I save humanity? I don't want to see them perish. If I could save him, I would instruct him to build a boat of these materials to these dimensions." And so it was that kind of disclosing without saying directly. And that, I feel, is something, when I first read that, and then when I started seeing certain films, this thing kind of started to make sense to me, where it was just like, okay, it seems like there are some of these things throughout history that are meant to be sort of read between the lines of. And, maybe this sounds like nonsense to a lot of people, but, we've all seen movies that speak to us on a certain level and that kind of suggest other things. And, one of them is, not this guy. We'll get to that one in a second. But, one of them is like The Matrix. This was, a movie that kind of got a lot of people talking about stuff. And, one of the things, what did Morpheus say to Neo? Do you remember?
What, the red and the blue pill?
Well,
free your mind, expand your mind. What did he say?
Yeah, well, that was
I know that Neo says, "Wow."
He does say that a lot. And Morpheus did offer Neo that choice between the red pill and the blue pill. But the overall concept of the film was that this reality is an illusion. And if you recall, when they unplugged Neo from the Matrix, he woke up, right? And he was in this pod full of goop. And, he's like, "Oh, man, what's going on?" And then what did Morpheus tell him? He said, "Well, the world got taken over by machines, and you're born into this pod, and they just harvest your life energy. And everything that you experience is not actually happening. What you were was a battery in a pod to serve the machines," right? And so that was way out, and there was no substantiation to it at the time. It was more a metaphor for like how society is run. And, well, you serve your masters, you work your shitty day job, and you work your entire life to live, just to exist comfortably on this planet that you were born into. But then, this was what, like 20 years ago?
15, yeah.
Since then, you have actual scientists, like science has now caught up to the Weinstein brothers, as it turns out. you know, and they're saying that like, well, you know, the further down we look, it looks like the basic substrate of reality is sort of holographic, you know, and the science of it is a little bit beyond my ability to explain, but you have like actual people like you know, Stephen Hawking and Neil deGrasse Tyson, and you know, people that have you know, spent years and years and possibly decades in school and have spent their lives. Michio Kaku is another one, brilliant you know, Japanese physicist. And all of these people are saying that like, yeah, well, it turns out that the further down we look, this is actually what we're finding. And this, you know, this you know, 3-part film that was full of explosions and car chases and fight scenes, that little bit, you know, that whole reality isn't what you think it is, has actually turned out to be in the process of being confirmed since then. And so
You had the philosophers of the Enlightenment saying similar things, proposing similar theories, analogies. I think that this computer machine example is just the same way of putting what we've heard time and time again throughout history, just in a modern context, to understand that the world is just an illusion, which must be true if it keeps coming up in all these other things.
well, yeah, you know,
But
and
then the thing I question is like, okay, so you can know that on an abstract level, maybe even a practical level, you get to that, but then there's still the human level of being unhappy and unsatisfied and unfulfilled that really has
Sure.
nothing to do with this greater scheme of the universe or your life energy, or maybe it does. I mean, they want you to be unhappy so they can harvest your, like in Monsters Inc. I know we're getting to that.
yeah, man, and that was kind of like, yeah, we're building towards that, and you know, I wanted to bring that up because, you know, this you know, as silly as it might seem, like, you know, so many people see these, you know, Disney and Pixar movies, and saw this one and was just like, oh, that's a cute story, and it's you know, John Goodman and Billy Crystal, thank you. No, they're just, yeah, you know, it was fun movie. But when you look at the construct of the storyline, and you have the monsters, and of course they're fuzzy and cute and, you know, wisecracking, but what their job was to scare children. Monster in the closet, monster under the bed kind of thing. Their job was to scare children for the purpose of this exact same thing, harvesting the energy through fear of
Yes.
people.
But what do they find at the end?
Well,
Laughter is more effective.
what they find at the end is, and this
That's
is,
not true. What they found at the end.
well, I don't know. I think both of them are contagious. I think negativity is contagious, and I think positive, you know, it's opposite being positive energy, laughter, these higher vibrations, these higher phases of energy, however you want to say it, are more powerful. And higher frequencies of things always cut through. Your piccolo in the marching band, a single piccolo will cut through 20 tubas,
Good analogy.
right? And you know, there's other analogies too. One of my favorites was a epitaph on the victim of the Holocaust, and it said, "All of the darkness in the world cannot put out the light of one small candle." And you know, I mean, these are profound statements, and I think an equally profound one was made in this kind of silly Disney movie. But you know, you're not allowed to say that out front. Just like Enki wasn't allowed to specifically tell an individual how to save humanity, he had to kind of think of a roundabout way to do it. And a quote that I found recently, and this is attributed to Hermes. There's certain arcane documents, and one of which is the emerald tablet. There's one that's associated with Hermes. There's one that's associated with Thoth. Obviously, Hermes was Greek mythology. Thoth was Egyptian. And you know how Egyptian mythology kind of got sort of transmutated into Greek mythology. Greek mythology became Roman mythology. You know, these, all of the stories are very similar. And they all basically say the same thing. So Hermes, Thoth, and one thing that is attributed to Hermes, and he said this, and it's my favorite quote almost of all time, but it applies specifically to this episode. He said, "The lips of wisdom are closed except to the ears of understanding." And so it kind of suggests that there's certain information that is not for the masses. And we might think that that's fucked up, but, you know, I mean, you think about how society is, you know, like the way people deal with their children. You don't tell little kids certain things. You make these cute little allegories about Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny, and they're more allegories for why you should be good. Be good, you know. And if you told a little kid at the time, because little kids are selfish by nature, like they haven't learned how to be empathetic yet. Like there's a little bit of maturity that needs to go on between childhood and adulthood. And so be good because you'll be rewarded for it is the basic concept. And it's not an incorrect thing to say, even though you're rewarding a child with an actual physical gift. The conditioning or the concept of teaching is still sound, and I feel like the people who are actually the keepers of this information, that actually know what the fuck is going on, a lot of it gets used for wickedness and for greed and to corrupt. But there's also a lot of it that gets let out into the public, you know, with this sort of disguised disclosure that doesn't get picked up on by the masses. And so that kind of denotes that, like, well, there's certain other things that people at large are not ready to know. And as much as I'd like to say, well, that's bullshit and you should tell everyone what's going on, I have to admit, like, there's a certain percentage of the population that isn't ready to hear most of it.
They don't want to hear it.
They don't want to, and they can't. I mean, when you consider that, like, you know, people spend so much time, the mass of people spend so much time talking about how important it is to, you know, what are the things that get put out there all the time? You know, there's Caitlyn Jenner. You should be nice to Caitlyn Jenner. Of course you should. Be accepting of people, but it's these kind of very base concepts that people are still arguing about. They're like, well, no, it's weird. Yeah, no, you're a shithead. Change something about yourself. But these kind of basic constructs are still, it seems, needing to be said. You know, old Donald Trump, you know, he's talking a bunch of shit about immigrants, and you know, he should be a nicer person. Of course he should. The fact that we are still arguing about it, the fact that this person is given the time of day anymore, means that we're not ready to know the bigger shit that's going on. Sorry. Stop endorsing this kind of nonsense, you know. It sucks to say, but, like, this is our fault. It's our fault that the aliens don't talk to us or whatever. It is the responsibility of all people to start looking at things differently, because the evidence is out there. The stories have already been told. You know, as Joseph Campbell said, the way through the labyrinth is already thoroughly known. Like, you've already been told that story. Start doing the damn thing. And so it's at this point in the day where I want to talk about, we've started doing a segment recently. I think you were here for the first one, right?
Yeah.
And so we're on our, I think it's the third one now. And this is our fuckface of the week. And this is governor of Wisconsin. And yeah, no, I made him, I didn't make him look this way. This is an actual photo that was taken of him. He's just that fucking stupid looking. This is Governor Scott Walker of Wisconsin. And he is the worst example that I have found of a what's called crony capitalism. And so to give you a little bit of an idea of what he did that put him on my radar, and he's done a bunch of stupid shit. Like he took collective bargaining rights away from just about every government employee in his state, affecting their ability to negotiate for higher wages. My favorite thing that he did, and when I say favorite, I mean the most fuckface thing that he did, was he took $300 million out of the state university budget. So this was money that would have gone to grants for, tuition grants for students, maybe higher teacher salaries, improvements to schools statewide. He took that money and he did this on one day. About a week later, he announced a plan to build a brand new stadium for the Milwaukee Bucks. Good job, asshole. Yep, Scott Walker is a fuckface. And the best part, he you could say, well, $250 million, well, you said he took $300 million out of the budget. What did he do with the other $50 million? He might have done something good with it. No, what he did was he took that other $50 million and he loaned it to a man named John Hamm for a hotel development project. And it turns out that John Hamm is not only a friend of Scott Walker, which would make it crony capitalism in itself, but John Hamm is also the owner of the Milwaukee Bucks and the campaign finance chair for Scott Walker's campaign fund. And so, you basically took $300 million out of schools, and you gave it to your homie. You're a piece of shit, Scott Walker. And there's another one that I found. So he went to Marquette University, and I don't mean to say anything bad about Marquette. It's not their fault that
Scott Walker went there.
Yeah, I'm sure it's a fine school. And to their credit, they kicked him out for cheating. They caught him cheating, and they asked him to not come to school the next semester. But they also, this photo came up also, and man, it's so great. Oops, not that one. Oh, yeah, here we go. Yeah, man, this fuckhead, man, and it's one of those, an old private photo. This also happened the semester he was caught cheating. And
see, but that shows that even from a young age, he knew he wanted to be governor.
Well, that is true, and it proved that, yes, he would be an excellent politician, and I will give him this much. He is an excellent politician, and I don't mean that in a good way. I mean that in the same way that I mean that George W. Bush was an excellent politician, as so many others before him were. But yeah, man, and I'm all about like, oh man, I had a good time in college and I did some fucked up shit. But you know what, man? I never wore skimpy negligee and posed showing my ass crack atop a Nazi flag putting up the Z Kyle. It takes a special fucking piece of garbage to do that. And when you see these things, it really is no surprise that he has come to do the things that he does. But yeah, it's just one of those things. Scott Walker's a fuckface, a piece of shit. And, that being said, I think that, we should all, for the sake of humanity, pray for this man. He's obviously a person in office. He's not going anywhere anytime soon. We should pray that, he changes something about himself and starts being a better person, because you really can't get a whole lot worse than posing in negligee on a Nazi flag, putting up the Z Kyle. Fuck you, Scott Walker. Change something about yourself right now, you piece of shit. So it's at this point in the evening that we have to go. But I would like to shake hands with my friend Adam Papigan and say thank you once again for coming on my show and talking to me about some way out stuff.
Anytime.
And in closing, I'll go ahead and put this back up full screen. Don't be like this piece of shit. And in the meantime, wherever you're going, get there safe. Take care, everyone.